Well, welcome everyone. Today we have Ashleigh Carter from Bierstadt Lager House and Will Kemper from Chuckanut. I'm Doug Piper and I'm the host of Gourmet Brewing Channel in Greenville, South Carolina in the USA. And I want to thank you so much for spending time with Ashleigh and Will and myself because you're at a place where we strive to make your day a little more delicious, one sip at a time. Now, I want to bring everybody up here on screen as we kind of go through, but please do me a big favor and share in the chat if the audio and video looks okay. Can you see Ashleigh? Can you see Will's? Everybody looking okay? And that I'm as good as I can be. So, they can't hear your applause, so do me a favor. They are volunteering their time. Please write in the chat and let them know how much you appreciate them taking this much time with us today, because my guess is we'll go 2 hours, and they've already been on here for 30 minutes having to endure me for a little bit. So they'll be here 2.5 hours, and that's a big commitment. So please write in the chat how much you appreciate it. Looks like everything's okay from what I can tell. So audio and video's good, so we'll concentrate on moving forward. So another thing's the big help for me. There's the polls kind of at the bottom of the screen. Do those and answer those polls because that really helps me figure out what our new programming is. And as a matter of fact, that's why Ashleigh and Will are here. I didn't even actually know that much about Will until you guys started asking questions and said, hey, we want Will on there. We want Ashleigh on there. And what do you know? We got both of them on here. So with that, let's talk a little bit about Ashleigh. Ladies first, Ashleigh. She is the owner and brewmaster of Bierstadt Lager House. She started in a homebrew shop, and in just 10 years, she was an assistant brewer at Dry Dock, then the lead brewer at Brewing, and now Bierstadt. And they got a complete horizontal lagering tanks. Excuse me, that might have been my wife giving me an audio check. Well, so I think we're good. They have horizontal lagering tanks and Bavarian-style flotation tanks. And she was named Wine Enthusiast 2020 Top 40 Tastemakers. And I think she was only one of 2 brewers that actually made that list. So that is pretty cool. Will Kemper, a diploma from London's Institute of Brewing and Distilling, a BS in Chemical Engineering, Siebel's Brewing from Microscopy and Microbiology, the University of California, Davis, for the first class of master brewers. He's taught at the American Brewers Guild in Davis, a brewmaster. Now, he gave me a list of the 11 breweries. He could have made it an even 12. 11 breweries prior to Chuckanut. So I guess Chuckanut makes 12. And have you know, this was his short bio. So if you're a first-time viewer, these are monthly free events with subject matter experts. And it's our 77th free major event. And this is due to supporters like Luke Pernoto, who volunteers and helps me with the copywriting. Whit Lanning helps me a lot with the glassware. We do all this through crowdfunding via Patreon. So I have a shout out today from one of our supporters, Brian Rabe. And Ryan has quite a background also. Let's see here. Where is it? Oh my gosh. I've lost it. Okay, Brian, I'm sorry. You have quite a write-up, and it didn't get on this screen. But I can tell you, he has one of the most amazing homebrewing careers that I have ever read. I was talking to him shortly before. It reads like a pro brewer, but it's not his day job. So I bet he'll have some great comments in there. I will actually add some of that and share that with everybody else. So my apologies, Brian. I don't know what happened to that screen, but you have quite a write-up. So we're going to move on. The replay will be available immediately. And for those of you who are regular, you know these events are totally free. And Gourmet Brewing is a community-funded channel. It's supported by the generosity of so many of you, as well as homebrew clubs. So, but I just want to give a big shout out for all our Patreon supporters, because we wouldn't be here without you. And so I am incredibly appreciative of you making this available. The supporters receive audio files, the MP3s, behind the scenes, brewery tours, and more things that are coming. So if you click on the green button down here below, you can see more and learn more how to support what we're doing here. Please join the team and support these events. We also have a Facebook group, the Facebook Gourmet Brewing. I'll see if I can throw that in the chat right quick. See if we can do it quickly. Aha. So that's our Facebook group where we talk a lot. Also, we have the live streams appear in there. And AHA members, the opportunity to vote for the governing committee closes in less than 2 weeks. So if you like what I'm doing here, I would appreciate your vote, and I will do all I can to encourage AHA to do more things like this. I'm a big fan of virtual, and I want to encourage AHA to do more virtual things. Speaking of virtual, if you're having any issues, click on the follow button in the upper right-hand corner, and that will allow you to follow my programs. It gives you notifications in case you didn't get the email. Refreshing the browser solves most technical issues. Reducing the resolution in the lower right-hand corner gear symbol could help you if your bandwidth is poor. And please share in the chat, where you're from and link up. This is a networking event. Submit your questions in the Ask a Question field, which is right down here at the bottom. Looks like we've got 15 so far. Let's see who has the most popular question, because everybody gets a vote. Looks like Ricardo has the top 2 most popular questions. So we spend the most time on the ones that are voted up the highest. So be sure to not only ask your questions, but also to vote. Again, on our poll, it's very helpful. And when you sign up, always click the auto registration. That helps me get things going quickly. And I see Al from Sydney, Australia. Thank you, Al. I appreciate you joining us. I also do virtual speaking and in-person speaking and private virtual tastings and events. So if I can help you with that, please contact me and let me know. Couple of great events coming up. I've got some video that I had from Blumenau, Brazil. I was all over Brazil for the past 11 days. I got to judge and do the best of show in the 3rd largest beer event in the world. That was a real privilege. Also got coming up, Stephen Powell's at Boulevard. We're going to be talking about Brett Saisons. And at the end of the month, Julia Hertz, AHA's new director. We're going to be talking brewery setups. And I think I saw Crispy Fry there in the chat. One of the ones we're going to be talking about is Crispies. So we'll have some neat things about all the ranges of brewery setups. So that will be neat. And if you hadn't got enough, we have a Zoom after party. I will put the link up right here on the screen. It's just a bit.ly link. And if you are interested in joining us when this is over, click on the link there, and that is the Zoom call. I will put it up when we get towards the end. Nothing formal there. We all just kind of hang out and finish our beers together. So let's get started. That's enough of all that kind of stuff. I have a kickoff question for you guys. Now, I get asked this question a lot, but I probably don't answer it very well, and I would like to hear your answer to it. And Ashleigh, I hope you will answer it first, so I'm going to take you full screen as soon as I ask the question. So, how would you describe the difference between a craft lager and an ale?
Honestly, first of all, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with Will Kemper, somebody I've admired for such a long time. Makes it possible to do what I do, make craft lager. To me, one of the biggest, differences is just drinkability. You're really working with 2 ingredients, trying to limit the amount that yeast really contributes to to the beer. So drinkability, crispness, crispy boys or whatever you want to call them, and just the ability to have more than one. The flavor profile is just right, that you want to drink multiple of them. That's, to me, is the biggest difference between ale and lager.
Well,
Um, Thank you, Doug, for allowing us to be here. And Ashley, it's really an honor to be with you as well. I can think of four places that I'd love to be in the world to drink beer: Munich, Bamberg, Chuckanut, and Denver at your place. So
Thank you.
nice being here. I speak as the perspective, the difference between lagers and ales. There's obviously a parallel. We make beer essentially parallel fashion, ales and lager. The difference, though, is fermentation. Fermentation uses a yeast that's workable at low temperatures. Ales, the yeast does not work. What happens there? You have consequences, byproduct of fermentation. It's very temperature dependent. So working with lagers, yeah, we can work with lagers at higher temperature, steam beer or whatever, but we prefer not to because it affects the byproducts of fermentation.
all right. I like that. For such a complex question, you guys know how to really boil it down. And that's what's going to be fun. So we're going to move through this pretty quickly. We have 5 points. And so we're going to try and spend about 10 minutes with each one. So we're going to move through these pretty quick. So, Will, I'm going to ask you to kind of help us with the first question. If someone is working on lager recipe development, what's important about lager recipes?
To me, total makeup. And let's begin with water. You can't make good beer with bad water. Taste that water. I travel around many places. And I drink bad water. I can't imagine trying to make good beer with bad water. So let's look at the water chemistry to begin with. And if it needs to be adjusted, adjust it. Then what happens is we have main raw materials, obviously the malt and the hops. Malt is wonderful these days compared to 1800s and 1900s. So there's variety as far as what you want to do. You have a lot of freedom in that. Now the hops are similar as far as the intent. So what is the intent? Lager beer is you want to have a classical beer with lager styles, whether it's a Helles, Pilsner, Dunkel, anything like that. It's important to use a precise raw materials for that. So as far as recipe makeup, though, if you make beer from homebrewers, and by the way, I got in brewing professionally as a homebrewer as well. And so I identify with virtually every homebrewer out there. We all know recipes. We all know what should be done. We know the proportions of what should be done. It's doing it. It's the actual accomplishment of making that beer. That's the difference.
Well, I know why you're a teacher now. I bet you were a lot of fun when you were teaching. But Ashleigh, what do you think on recipes?
I think Will put it pretty well. For me, it's just about keeping it simple, especially in lager brewing. It's very much about the technique. And, just because you have access to all of the ingredients doesn't mean you need to put all of the ingredients in every single beer. And using that deftness of hand and always, pulling backwards. Most of the lager recipes, specifically German lagers, can be made with, only 2 malts, really. So it's about simplifying and, maybe 1 hop. It's about simplifying your process and simplifying the ingredients and deciding whether or not something really belongs just for the sake of complexity, or if it really belongs because it is attributing to the flavor profile in a positive way.
So just one last question along the recipe. Have you seen some recipe mistakes that you'd like to point out, Ashleigh?
Crystal malt. Too much crystal malt, and it really doesn't belong. With a very deft hand. This is an English brewing, English style ales, which I've seen recipes that are horrifying and had the beers and they're delightful. But in traditional lager making, crystal malt really doesn't have a place. Too much of it. It's such a delicate. It doesn't have yeast to really fall back on. as a flavor component. So it ends up tasting kind of like you got punched in the mouth. Like I get a really very strong iron character from it. So crystal malt, for the most part, shouldn't really be a part of any lager beer, with the exception of very few, maybe like a dark Czech lager, and even then, a very deft hand with it. Is it not a replacement for decoction? How about that?
Will, how about recipe mistakes?
I think what Ashley was addressing, that is true with me as well. Simplify. It's like French cooking. You don't want to go in there and just add 10, 20 different kinds of spices on that. It's conflicting in flavor, and that's not what you want. What you want is to sit down and really enjoy drinking that beer and not fight it. Too often beers are made and you have to fight to drink it. That's not the intent. That's not the idea. Now, there are reasons why you have to fight it, and it's addressing those reasons that's the important thing.
Well, let's do this. Ashleigh, we had talked about some beers that would go along with this, and I think you had actually suggested a Coors Banquet would make for some interesting discussion. So I'm going to pour it, and would you mind describing it while I do the pour? And then, Will, we understand you've got some history on Coors Banquet you can share with us. Is that right?
Well, too much history. Way too much history with Coors Banquet. When I grew up in Colorado, so yes.
All right. Well, I'm going to bring you back on screen in just a moment. All right. So let's switch over. I'm going to see if I can give a nice pour to this, Ashleigh.
Yeah, I even got my Coors glass here.
Oh, look at that.
It's an old school one. That's a nice pour there.
I'm trying not to spill it on my keyboard.
Are you really doing a podcast if you haven't spilled it on your keyboard, though? Come on, man.
So what should we get off of this?
Well, Coors Banquet is only made here in Colorado, which is a lot different than most of the Coors products that are made all across the country. As far as like what you get in the aroma tonight, it actually has a very big isoamyl acetate, a big banana character to it. Very, very low in hops. So it actually comes up as fairly sweet when you drink it. It will get the job done when it's very, very cold. But if you think about this beer, if it had maybe 20 IBUs, it would be much more balanced. But it is definitely a classic beer for Colorado, and definitely a classic, pale lager, as it were. Made with adjuncts, so it's not all malt, unfortunately. But again, this beer, I think it really ticks the boxes, but could be a little bit more balanced if it had more hops in it. And so I'd like to taste what the beer tasted like when it first, came out.
Well, I think that's where Will comes in. So, Will, while I start to enjoy mine, I would love to hear you tell us a little more about the history.
Well, what Ashley was discussing the beer and the change. I'm not going to call it evolution. I'm going to call it change. And why that isn't due to making the best beer, due to stability factors, selling it far away, all those things. Coors had the reputation of everybody in God's creation had to come back home with a suitcase of Coors. Well, that's referred to as marketing, and very good at that. And now going forward, what they've addressed by widening the product availability is that they've basically, I'm going to say, watered down. Yeah, we can filter like crazy. We can do things to slightly remove a more positive tasting aspect, which from a brewer's perspective, like us, that's the intent is taste, flavor, utmost enjoyment. But you can affect that in various ways. And I tend to think that what has gone on over the years with that beer and a lot of beers. By the way, the other thing I want to point out here is we're talking about malts and such. God doesn't come down and give these in rock solid form. We have variability with malt over the years as well. So addressing what that flavor and taste should be, assuming that you have consistent malts, that's not the case. I would dare say, even with the best malting companies in the world.
One thing I've noticed, and actually I don't drink Coors Banquet very often. Matter of fact, this might be the first 6 pack I've ever bought, or at least in quite a while. There's a pretty significant carbonic bite to it, which I find unusual. Is that more than just carbonation? Is that hops? It's really just, it's not unpleasant, but I mean, it's a distinct bite.
These are highly carbonated beers. I think pale lagers should be highly carbonated. And I think it really comes, you notice it a lot in a beer like this because there's not a lot of other flavors necessarily. So it does come out there. I mean, it's carbonic acid. It really is kind of a pain, actually, if you think about it. But it is a key ingredient to all beers. And I think that, when we're talking about recipe, we're talking about ingredients, we're talking about malt and hop and yeast, and all these other things, we really do forget that carbonic acid is an actual ingredient. It's a flavor carrier. It can make a sweet beer taste drier because of the acidity. It can make, if you're having a traditional English style beer, the softness of the carbonation, the way the flavors, in your mouth, the way they dry your tongue or don't. Even something different between Dunkel and Pilsner or Pils. The carbonation between those two beers is different. And as brewers, we really try to dial that in to see what carries the flavor the best way. A carbonation like this in like a dark beer, Dunkel, or a Bock beer would be inappropriate and would make the beer taste weird. So for a pale lager, I quite like the carbonation. I'm always trying to stuff more CO2 in the beer if I can. It's punchy.
Yeah, well, it's very distinct. Well, let's move on then. We'll move to the next part of this. But I did see one interesting comment in our chat that I wanted to come back to right quick if I can find it quickly. I don't see it. Okay, we'll move on. Don't want to waste time. We got a lot to go through. So the next thing we want to talk about is lager ingredient selection. And Ashleigh, I'm interested in your input there because I know in our pre-stream when we talked, you really emphasized ingredients. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think what Will said about French cooking and about I think even Italian cooking, anything, it's really about finding the best ingredients and letting those ingredients speak for themselves. Finding the best malt. European malt has a different flavor than something that's grown locally. It doesn't mean that that's better or worse, but when you're trying to create a European tasting beer, I think you need European ingredients. As far as hops go, when you're looking at selection, very much so low alpha hops for us. We want to really let the hop material be a part of the beer because these beers aren't necessarily what you would consider hoppy. And then there's yeast. Trying to make lager beer with Kvike or whatever it is, fake lager beer. They don't taste like lager. People say they do, but I've had enough of them to disagree politely that these are not lager. It is a different kind of yeast than Kvike or than California ale or any of those things. And then, really trying to bring all those things together so they all fit together, And then for us, water. Honestly, Will said if you wouldn't drink the water, I don't know why you would make beer with the water. However, I do think, in our situations that you can pretty much import every other ingredient and our water. And luckily I live in, Colorado and Denver, which is why there's Coors and Budweiser here, that we have really good water here to make beer with, that the water is what makes our beer unique. We can import all the other ingredients. We can use the same techniques, but our water is what, is kind of, what makes our beer us. So we actually don't treat our water that much because of that, because I do like the character of it and even the variability.
Will, I'd like to hear your comments on ingredients.
No, I actually pretty much hit it. Now, the one thing as far as for Chuckanut and Bierstadt as well, the use of of imported malt and hops for our style. That's what we choose to do. And we can't make American or English beers as well with those, by the way. You can't be all things to all people. And if you try to do what we do with an inappropriate supply, it just don't work. Once again, we choose the best raw material to try to make the best beer, but that has to come from certain places. If we made different beers, for example, very English beers or American beers, IPAs, the raw materials we use are not appropriate. So we have to look at that. Another example of that is that the very soft water that we commonly use, whether in Colorado or Washington State, where we fortunately make our beers in, they're incredibly soft. Certain beers, classical Bass beer, the water quality there is very, very hard. I've even seen certain things, certain chemical makeup analysis that some of these waters, they don't even pass drinking water standards. They're so high, but they're appropriate for that style of beer. We're talking lagers these days, and so focus on what is true as far as lager raw materials.
I like the mistakes question. As far as ingredients goes, and this might go on forever, so just think of your best story. But Ashleigh, either in your own experience or with others, a lager ingredient mistake?
Um, wow, that list is long. Not for me. I've been lucky enough in my life to have been taught very well and heeded the advice of very smart people. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, basically. But anytime we start talking pastry pills or fake pills or whatever it is, or it just goes off. It just goes off the deep end. So, I just like it to keep it, at least to keep it to beer ingredients. Not too many foul ups that way.
Will, how about you?
As far as making mistakes,
Yeah.
gee, Lord, I've made beer that there's no way in God's creation people should be drinking. Fortunately, not over the last few years. I can't remember the last bad beer I made because I kept on practicing. As a home brewer, I just was able to make beer like galore to the point of absurd excessiveness. So I learned so much by going through that path and then focusing on what should be. But as far as making beer now, it's, at least at Chuckanut, we're pretty technically adept. We're very computerized because that is the world we live in. We work in controls that method, whether pumps or temperatures and such. And so recently, no, we do well recently.
Well, the next beer that we had that we were going to talk about was the Bohemian Pils. But now I understand, Will, you were not able to get one.
That's correct. But I want to speak about that because I was brewing in Monterrey, Mexico for a few years, and the brewery Cuauhtémoc makes Carta Blanca, Dos Equis, and Bohemia. So, yeah.
Well, I will do the pour. Ashleigh, I'm going to turn off your camera for just a minute,
Good.
and then I want to come back and hear your thoughts too. So, Will, I'm going to try and do this and not spill it on the keyboard. And if you don't mind talking to it.
No, a lot of it goes back to my, experience in Mexico. Once again, working there and becoming acquaintances and friends with the brewers at the brewery there. And so that brewery, Bohemia, is the most respected beer. It was interesting. Bohemia, what happens there is if you go to the brewery, I was amazed, but some of the other beers, they just, like packaging departments, such as the bottles are coming through, they'll be conversing and they might even be reading a newspaper. But with Bohemia, everybody's focused. Everybody's focused on that. And drinking Bohemia in Monterrey, Mexico where it's made. That was an important thing. And yes, it was wonderful. All the qualities, the drinkability is there. I haven't had beer as good. I haven't had Bohemia as good in the United States. And that's my point. That's why I want to say we don't make steel ingots. We don't make something that does not have a curve in the flavor profile and what's going on. Obviously, beer changes. And the best beers can be very fragile because wonderful aspects of the most fragile beers, due to time, due to abuse of handling, they go away. Once again, I've tried to drink Bohemia in the United States, but it's not as good as it is in Mexico. If you had Bierstadt or Chuckanut, you might be able to get it. Fortunately, it quite likely won't be as good as what we, Ashleigh and myself, want you to drink when we have it at the place. That's the nature of our beer business. That's the nature of beer. If you don't see how beer changes, you're not very aware. And now understanding how it changes, different styles will have different, I refer to them as flavor curves. So actually the beer might be green and then it can get better. Think in terms of wine. That's really our parallel there. But if we're talking about beer and we're talking about whatever kind of beer and it's the same day one as day 300, no, it's not. And be aware of that and understand how your beer changes.
Ashleigh, what comments can you add?
Yeah, I think that we oftentimes think that this is a living thing, really, and I'm extraordinarily jealous of having it because I've had it sometimes here in the United States where it's been pretty good. There is a hop character to it that's unlike a lot of the larger Mexican imports. But I've never had what Will is talking about. I've had varying degrees of damage, essentially. And I think first thing you've got to do with a lot of these beers is look at them and see, especially the macro beers, if there's any sort of like haze to them. And if it's hazy already, chances are that it is damaged. The beer did not leave the facility that way. Look at Chuckanut beers, our beers as well. Although we did both get to drink it in Italy, and that tasted pretty good, huh? How well?
Yeah. Okay.
But it wasn't the one time we had it. But that was a very pointed. We sent the freshest beer the fastest we could to drink it there. But a lot of times these beers are sitting on the shelf and they're not being rotated. Or a lot of times with the macro brands, we talked about the quality thing beforehand. Some of these decisions are not made from a qualitative perspective. They're made from a quantitative perspective or quality over a long period of time. Maybe a beer never starts as a 10 anymore. And I like to think our beer starts as a 10 and degrades much faster. But a lot of these beers maybe start at a 6 or 7 and then they degrade to like a 4 over a longer period of time, but they were never as good as they could have been, or they are super fresh or right off the tank or any of those things. So yeah, definitely. I mean, you can see there's a slight veil in this beer for me, and you can already tell there's a little bit of honey character to it. It's a little bit sweeter tasting. It's just lost its brightness, its snappiness. So it's fairly damaged. This one's actually in okay shape. But to be aware when you're purchasing a beer that is from a long ways away, it may not exceed or even meet your expectations. And that's not due to necessarily the quality of the beer. It's due to because it's impossible. It changes over time. It can't be the same for a long period of time.
It's interesting to compare the two, though. They're quite distinctly different. The Bohemia is far more hoppy, a bit not as dry, not as crisp in the carbonation. It's much more distinct, the carbonic bite. But overall, the Bohemia is a much more flavorful, richer, more complex beer than the Banquet. The interesting thing,
Will, do you know what hops are in that? I've heard middle fruit, but
yeah,
I'm not sure.
When I talked to the brewers about it, it's interesting in that when they got the hops in, apparently it came in semi, and it just like once a year type of thing.
Okay.
And it comes in a semi, and everybody's pretty excited that that semi had finally there, and they open it up, and they're using all these. Actually, they were fresh hops there. So no, but I can't say for sure.
Well, it's very hop forward compared to the banquet, and it's quite pleasant. But yeah, I've got a little honey in mine also, but it's not entirely unpleasant. I would. It's a nice beer. I've never had it before that I know of, so
I,
I'm really kind of excited about it.
I Ashley pointed out something very, very important. You can actually see flavor. So Bohemia in particular, Bohemia, no, that should be a very, not crisp, but it should be a brilliant beer. Brilliant beer. If you see something in that, that tells you the makeup of that beer. That beer should not have such a makeup. Period. So you can assess beers even before you drink them, just visually. Yep.
So this one is the Coors Banquet,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the Bohemia. They both got a little condensation from it. I'm in the deep south, so we have a little humidity, and it's raining. But they're about the same color, and I'd say pretty close to the same clarity.
Well, the thing is, so you're drinking in South Carolina and Ashley's in Colorado here, and what is the history of those beers? What I was getting at though is that they're haze forming components there. There's chill haze if it's too cold, but if you don't have a chill haze scenario, and these particular beers, you see some kind of haze within them. Those beers are past prime. That's a kind way of saying they've gone bad.
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, it looks bright, and I'm in Colorado where there's literally no condensation.
Yeah.
It's like a teaspoon of water here. But, on my end, it's hard to tell like in the video, but I can definitely see a thin veil. Like it's
Yeah.
it's hard to tell, but it's just barely veiled. And that's honestly the best sometimes you can hope for, but sometimes I'll be interested when we pour the Bitburger, downright cloudy beers,
Yeah.
and it didn't leave the brewery that way. So
No.
again, I like that Will pointed out you can see it, you can tell, you can not only use your taste buds, but you can see it and see, is this going to be a good example of this or not, just
And
based on that.
yeah, and let me also point out, I go back to, like God could come down and make the most brilliant beers, but after a while they're going to haze up. That's just the nature of the game.
All right. And Steve Morgan points out that at least on the Bohemia website that they're Saaz hops.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to see you Thursday night. All right. Let's move on. Brewing steps that impact lager drinkability. Now, one common theme I heard from both of you as we were trying to zero in on your topics was drinkability. It's clearly a passionate topic for both of you. So, Ashleigh, I'm going to ask you if you take first crack at what brewing steps impact lager drinkability.
I think a part of it, of course, is recipe, and we kind of talk about, kind of your technique, essentially. First of all, using lager yeast to begin with is already going to be the number one, right? I kind of look at lager like it's the absence of yeast character. Like that's when I'm building a recipe. Lager yeast can have sulfur and things like that, but it's definitely not as large of a component flavor-wise as especially like a Hefeweizen or wheat beer yeast or something like that. But even just like a typical ale yeast, and I think that lends itself to the drinkability. And so when we're thinking about like doing these things, one of the biggest things is just time. It is the fifth component of making lager. Yeast, hop, water, and time, and malt and time, and giving yourself enough time to allow that beer to kind of go through its own natural progression, which it does compared to like an ale. Some of the other techniques, I mean, if you want to get really into it, things like decoction and things like that, I think those are components which make the beer more authentic, more traditional and more like the European counterparts. And we could go, I'm sure Will and I could go really deep into some of those things. But I don't know that that's the end all be all as far as, how to make lager. It's a different thing, and it takes a different set of ingredients. It takes a different level of patience. Like, I'm only patient enough to make lager. Like, I'm not patient enough to make like bourbon or scotch. I've got a limit to my patience as well. I do want to drink it. But definitely that drinkability, the crispness, ester profile or lack thereof. All of these things trying to inhibit the formation of esters while you're making it. How cold you ferment. The fermentation side, definitely, even more than the front side of ingredients and everything, is by far the most important part of making a drinkable lager. And us as lager brewers, we do really like drinking what we make. We really do like discussing the day's events or whatever over the beer. And the idea that this beer just kind of, in the European mindset or in the German mindset, that it kind of is just a part of what you're doing and it's not the actual entertainment itself, is kind of always our only goal. Can you drink a couple of them while you're talking about the rest of your life? And it doesn't have to be the entertainment, You're not sitting there trying to pick out, we're beer nerds, so we try to pick out hops and malt and all those things. But for your typical person, it's just about, you're living your daily life and kind of being a part of that. And I think that as lager brewers, that's all we're trying to do.
Will, drinkability, I know that's a big passion for you.
Oh yeah. Let me address just one aspect. Making lager beer. You have to make lager beer with cold conditioning, lagering conditions. This really comes down to temperature. And to say you're making lager beer at 35, 40 degrees, no, you're not making the best lager beer. And a lot of studies I've seen said, when you're talking about lagering, the colder you get, the better. Now, I don't know if circumstantially it's a physical character. It's a physical character that solids fall out of solution the colder you get. So whether yeast or other material, they fall out of solution at colder temperatures. And Doug, I gave you a graph on water, and you said you're going to be able to put that up? Very good. Okay. Now this is what I want to address, and it's actually something as far as it's kind of a pronounced curve, but it shows that the density of water is greatest at around 2 degrees Celsius. And what happens is when you go into lagering consideration and really think about a unit tanks and such, when you're talking about fermentation at higher temperatures, what happens is in a closed system, heat transfer is through what's called natural convection. Natural convection, meaning density. So unless you do something, it's a density consideration whether or not you're going to have movement towards the cold side. So what happens here is you have warmer temperatures, and as you get around 2 degrees Celsius, something like that, then that peak, then what happens is you go the other way. Your density starts to get low, and ultimately gets to a point of, that's why ice floats, by the way. But around 2 degrees Celsius, what happens here is that you have cooling considerations where you can have stratification. And what happens, think in terms of when you're lowering the temperature down from high temperatures, you go to one spot here, but then, and you cool it down, then you have rising forces due to the convection forces going upwards. So what you want to do is you have to make sure that you cool the beer down by jackets that are located low enough. Otherwise, what happens is you're going to have that stratification. And I've worked with breweries that, for example, they did not have cooling in their cone, and you literally had beers in 35 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit because it couldn't get lower. So the point is, you're not making correct lager beer at high temperatures. Now, by the way, Ashleigh does the horizontal, and one of the main reasons that you transfer into horizontal is to get it off the settled yeast. So that's a factor there. But you have to work with temperature considerations in order to optimize your cold condition or lagering. At Chuckanut, for example, we make Kolsch as well, but has a slightly higher, it has slightly lower alcohol content. So we find ourselves that we have to cold condition the glycol system at 31 degrees Fahrenheit versus the lager conditions at 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Otherwise, we'd be freezing our colts due to the slightly lower alcohol content. But this is a factor as far as make sure if you're making lager beer, you need cold conditioning.
I love that graph. That was awesome. Well, Ashleigh, final word on the most important steps for drinkability, and we'll get this Bitburger ready.
Oh, I mean, I think Will pretty much summed it up perfectly. Cold and having the ability to get it cold. We can get our, I frequently can at, 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And I think it does wonders for our beer. I'm able to filter that cold too. So I never get any chill haze coming back when it warms up or cools down again. It doesn't precipitate again. So getting it cold is absolutely a huge part of it.
All right. I'm going to get the Bitburger ready to pour. And Ashleigh, you're going to unpack it for me, correct?
I can, yeah.
All right. Will, I'm going to turn off your camera and then we'll bring you back on in a moment.
Oh, let me get a glass. I need to get a new glass. I have glasses for everything. I lost my Bitburger glass, though, so I think I probably broke it. All right. Ooh.
Well, what do you think?
All right. Well, mine is pretty damaged. Actually, weirdly enough, our Pils is based on the original gravity of this beer, 11.7. So this has always held a kind of a strong place in my heart for beers. Much more bitter than the past two beers that we've had, as Pils goes. Mine has pretty heavy amount of honey character to it, but fairly bright. But there's definitely a maltiness to it. It's definitely more hop aroma like the Bohemia, but a little bit more of that snappy bitterness and a little bit more of a sulfur character than either of those two beers, which to me is a key component of German style lager is the kind of SO2, SO2, kind of a struck match sulfur character. So having that is really a big part of it, but it's kind of diminished quite a bit because of the age of this beer. But definitely more bitter than the last two beers we had. In fact, I drank it and kind of had to piece it back together.
So how old is yours? I know I looked at mine. I think it was June.
Let's see. 7/20/21. And yours is out of a bottle. Mine's out of a can. Usually I try to get them if I can in a can. They're usually a little bit better shape than the bottles are, and they travel a little bit better. But it has a year-long expiration date on it, which is total bananas to me. I don't think any beer has, a year-long expiration date, I guess, unless it's like a smoothie chocolate beer or something. I have no idea about that stuff. But yeah, it has a year-long expiration date. But this is a July 20th. So
yeah, mine is
so
June.
It's quite old.
So, Will, you want to weigh in on the Bitburger?
Yeah, Bitburger is an interesting beer, wonderful beer to me, and German brewers in particular. Going back over the years, I've done several events with German brewers, and Bitburger seems to be the most popular beer amongst them as well. That says a lot.
It sure does. Well, let's move on then. I think we kind of, hops seems to be one of the distinguishing characteristics between these three pills. And I think, Ashleigh, you summed it up pretty good. The hop content in the Coors Banquet is fairly subdued compared to the other two. The Bohemian has a lot more, is far more hop forward. But the Bitburger to me is more bitter and less hop forward. So how would you describe what's right in lagers in a pils?
I mean, for me, it's definitely more of the snappy bitterness. I would say that this Big Burger, I've had it fresh um, there, and it is much more that the first thing that goes is the aroma. So it doesn't surprise me that it's very bitter, but not very hoppy in aroma because of how it's traveled and things like that. Hops to me in a pills, I like to think of them as salt, right? Like it should be bitter, snappy. It should have hop aroma, but kind of in a dusty way. Like when you think of like a IPA or something like that, very grassy, kind of a dry hop. I like a boiled hop character, so it's there, but it is more subdued. So you kind of have to look for it, but when it hits you with the carbonic acid, you can all of a sudden smell it, and that's that really low alpha, really wonderful soft hops. And traditionally in a pills, it's that kind of idea that bitterness kind of like dries your palate and makes you want to take another sip. And the pleasantness of the hops compared to like a Helles or something like that is much more at the forefront of it. And so it's kind of just trying to find that balance of the right amount of hops. And again, I do think it's really important to be a boiled hop character, and it shouldn't be a grassy, dry hopped or whirlpool hop character. So having that really dusty, snappy bitterness that kind of you have to look for a little bit, and kind of as you take a drink, you want to keep drinking it. That to me is real what pills is all about. German style pills, at least.
Will, how about you?
Well, as looking at hops, as far as the IBU, and while there are slight variabilities there, that just is truly just obviously the bitterness. So hops, the important thing to me is understanding that the makeup at what is a hop 3 to 10% alpha, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking 97 to 90% not of that consideration. Well, that's kind of the flavoring, if you will, that's imparted. The IBUs, are IBUs essentially. Just look at that. But the flavors, why are hops different? Now, way back, they just addressed IBU consideration, but it's flavor. So the hops have different flavor, and that's what we want to address as far as whatever style beer we're doing, but specifically lager beer. It's important to understand the other makeup going along. And to me, I want to address something that's rarely addressed. So it's residuals. So the idea here is we extract certain aspects from these solids, hops, malt, and ultimately the yeast. We have residual left over. Now, separate. Once we work within the boil or however you want to separate those flavors and IBUs, then get those solids out. Don't let those go to fermentation such. A suggestion, after the end of the boil, taste those hops. Taste that. Do you want those contributing to your flavor? Because if you add enough into your fermentation, they will contribute to the flavor. And I would submit not positively. So that's one aspect as far as manufacturing. So we can talk about that, but make sure you manufacture to limit those solids, because otherwise you're going to make bad beer if you have that bad flavor associated going into fermentation.
Ashleigh, final word on lager hops.
I think it's important. I think it's a little bit what Will is speaking to is. I really believe that. I mean, hops are only a small part alpha. There's a lot more to them, and so sometimes when people are making beer, I don't know how it got confused at some point that there are some hops that are purely bittering hops and some that are purely flavoring hops, etc. I think to really make a true lager, pills, it needs to be a lot of low alpha hops, because there is more than just alpha in there. It's a lot of other things. Our pills is only first wort hop, so we actually hop it while we're running off, and then a 70-minute hop, and it doesn't get anything later than that. And people are always surprised by that because there's a lot of actual hop aroma that's carried over from the first wort hops that doesn't actually end up, post fermentation or even post whirlpool, really. So just kind of thinking about hops in that way, that they are more than just, the number on there. I want to say it's John DeClerc's Textbook of Brewing, and they talk and they compare the two beers basically made with the same alpha, one being high alpha hops, one being low alpha hops. And basically it states in there that it's a much more pleasant, that's hard to describe, but if you drink enough beer, it's the drinkability. It goes back to the drinkability. It's a much more pleasant experience with a low alpha hop, because it's not just about bittering. It's not just about IBUs. There's other things in there. And so I think when you're thinking about recipe, and this kind of ties back honestly to the beginning, is when you're building this recipe, get rid of those magnums, get rid of whatever. We're making lager. It's really not that much hop material, or not that much hops. You're not throwing 7 pounds per barrel into an IPA. You can make a really amazing hoppy aroma bitter beer with 1.1 pounds per barrel if you're using them in the appropriate way and you're using the right alpha, the right type of hop. So that, to me, like when I'm thinking about hops, I think they're one of the most important things, and people often just buy Magnum or whatever just to throw it in the kettle to save $10, and really the drinkability is increased by some of the lower hops and more of the hop material that is in the beer.
Well, I think it's interesting to look at all the beers. I'm going to line it up right quick. So, all right, so this is the Banquet. This is the Bohemia. And this is the Bitburger. I don't know why the condensation is different on them, but clearly the lacing is far more distinct on the Bitburger. The Bohemia has held up its head pretty good. The Coors never really had much head at all, but the clarity and the color seemed to match up rather well, and I just thought that was just an interesting comparison. Now, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to talk about presentation next, Ashleigh, and I've had a great experience. I hadn't been to your brewery yet, Will, but I did GABF back in the fall. And interestingly enough, Ashleigh, everybody said, go by Bierstadt. I mean, I asked all these people, where should I go? And they said, go to Bierstadt. So I went and I got the slow pour. Steve Morgan told me you got to get to Steve, the slow pour. Well, I have a little video, and your bartender was nice enough to let me shoot this. So is it okay if I show this video? You've not seen it.
I'm sure it's just fine. I'm pretty sure I remember the day you were there, and I'm pretty sure that's my husband's kid who was actually behind the bar, which he needed a job. So he did a really good job, I'm sure of it, pouring it. So yeah, Ryan. I'm pretty sure it's Ryan who was there pouring it, Bill's kid. My co-owner and husband.
All right. Well, we're going to go to the video. It's about 90 seconds long. But and by the way, my apologies. It was a new camera. The focus is not as sharp as I'd like it to be. But I think you'll get the extent. You get a good feel for what it takes, or what the effort that Bierstadt puts into that beautiful slow pour. So we will go to that right away.
First thing we do is we clean the glass. Then we're going to open up the tap. We want to fill lager to between the lines of R, S, and T, with the rest being foam. All right, you can see we're right in the middle there between R, S, and T. Now we're going to leave this to let it build structure before we fill it up again. So we had the first pour here. If you look down to the glass, there's a very strong base of foam that's built up there. We want to preserve that, so we want to pour more on the side and bring the foam back up. So we'll do this. We can open up the tap now. You can see that head that we described is rising right out of the top there. Give it nice structure. So we'll leave it like this, let it sink down again, and we'll bring it back up and repeat the process about 2 more times. So do it again. Same deal. We want to preserve this head here. pour down through the sides to bring it up all the way. And we're going to need about 1, maybe 2 more of those to get it right to the top of this line here above the B. That's when we know it's going to be ready. All right, last pour, same as before. I'm going to go in on the sides and bring up this head that we've been working on. Bring it straight up like that. And that's your completed slow pour fills. All right. Here is the slow pour fills.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Now that is one beautiful beer.
That's great.
Oh, it was Cole, not Ryan. It was too bad, but he did a really good job. As you can tell, I'm only like this far on it right now, so.
Well,
I'm
I'm gonna pour
like that.
I'm going to try and pour mine, but that was just phenomenal. I sat there and I had to. I had another beer, so I was just watching it, and it held that head for so long. It was like whipped cream. It was quite an experience. I wish, unfortunately, my camera skills had been better, so I apologize to you that the focus was off a little bit. But I thought it. That is a phenomenal presentation, Ashleigh. I mean, it just, when you're handed a beer that looks like that, it's unforgettable in the beer world.
I mean, you ingest things with your eyes. I've been to Chuckanut, same thing. Even if it's not poured slowly or whatever, it's about having the proper amount of foam on it. It's about the way you dispense it. And oftentimes, unfortunately, we live in a country that we have an amazing amount of choice here, which is pretty cool that you can get. You have heard you talking about Stephen Paul's. You can get Saison Brett. You can go get an amazing IPA, and then like a lot of times it falls down, or go to a nice restaurant. It falls down at the finish line, And I think really focusing on that presentation, and for us, it's not a gimmick. It's the way that I wanted to have my beer served to me, and Bill wanted to have his beer served to him. And so we just decided that that's how we were going to make it be served to everybody, to have the same experience that we wanted to have. Drinking our beer every time. And so kudos to our bartenders, because they are far more patient than I am. I get I want it now. And so it's a good thing that I'm not behind the bar doing these things, because they really do take a lot of pride in doing it.
Well, it was, and I don't know if anybody realizes that was 90 seconds, but all that was sped up 500 times in the little segments where he let it sit there. So it was probably 7 minutes, I guess, turnkey.
5 to 7 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless it's JBF and it's 25 minutes, so.
Well, I'm going to give it a try, and I'm going to do, because you were kind enough to send me one, so I'm going to give it a try, see if I can do as pretty a pour. And while we're at it, Casey's asking, what's the secret to that amazing head retention?
There's a lot of secrets, First of all, or lastly, I had to get it into a package, and that's very difficult. It's not something I've had a lot of experience with, and had to, because of the pandemic and stuff like that. So, we really could have ruined it there. But, as Will would tell you, it's every part in the process. It's how you mash the beer. It's the malt that you use. It's the gentleness with which you transfer a beer, so you're not foaming it up to begin with. It's also capturing natural carbonation, which makes these really wonderful tight bubbles. And it's not just one thing. It's a ton of things. And that's kind of, when we think about making beer, it's not one thing 100% better. It's 100 things 1% better. And it's just part of the last things. And, I had to get that beer in a can, and I really could have messed it up doing that. So trying to preserve that in a can has been one of the hardest things I've had to do. Is trying to preserve the carbonation. You'll notice it's a very carbonated beer when you pour it, which makes me happy.
But it is beautiful. I mean, it is gorgeous. What a beautiful beer.
Thank you. I like it all right.
So I'm ready to taste it. So walk me through what I should get off of it.
So I always do say it's kind of a dusty hop aroma. So we use all middle brew. So this is I think the kids call it a smash beer, single hop, single malt, Barca Pills, malt, and then Hallertau middle brew hops, which right now these are 3 alpha. They're beautiful hops. So first wort hops, 70 minutes. So it should be strikingly bitter, should have a nice bitter character to it. And then the aroma should just kind of like flow up after that. But it should be bitter enough that it just kind of dries the palate. And this is a very fresh example compared to the ones we've had today, and it's very pale, which is what I like in a Pils as well. Have a very, very pale beer. So yeah, I don't like to, dissect it too much because I do pretty much every day, but I think the bitterness, perfectly bright. You'll never get a beer of ours that isn't perfectly bright. It's just something we believe in as a filtered beer that kind of checks all the boxes.
That is one, and the can is beautiful too.
Oh, thank you. We have an artist. He actually painted this. So this little thing on the side, how we serve it and everything, we serve it like that every time. In the 0.3 is actually a rendition painted by a local artist. So he makes it look amazing. I don't think I could photograph it even that well. So.
Well, that is really cool. Will, want to bring you on screen. I'm sorry that I can't share one with you.
No, that's okay. And, listening, Ashleigh, exactly from start to end, every step there is so connected. So you talk about foam, you talk about lacing, you talk about that. It starts at the beginning of the brewing process. Now, conceptually, how you want to address foam lacing and all that, my understanding, they're both foam positive and foam negative agents. And what happens is conceptually, you think in terms of when foam is created, it will tend to denature foam positive, leaving you. That's why you keep on, pouring beer. It's going to get a flat head because you're denaturing your foam positive aspects. But I think with Bierstadt and us, we're very fortunate in that we own our brewery, and our beer is made by brewers who respect brewing as opposed to anything else. So we try to optimize what we do, of which lacing foam, that's an integral part of beer.
Look at me showing the bubble.
Prost.
Well, we are a little bit past the bottom of the hour, and I promise everybody we'll try and transition to the questions then. If anybody needs a brief break, I'm just going to mention that we have sponsors, and those are our Patreon. I don't accept advertising. This is all provided by the Patreon supporters for the program. So again, down here at the green box, you can learn how to support future events because we've got a lot of fun ones coming up. And those of you that hadn't voted yet for AHA, the AHA members, we got the governing committee, and I see some governing committee members there actually in the audience. And so if you hadn't voted yet, I'm actually running for one of the 3 seats. So I hope you'll consider me if you like these kind of programs. So we're going to transition to the questions. Now we have 31 questions, which means at best we need to be less than 2 minutes apiece. But we want to spend our time on the most important questions. And so we do that by you voting. So everybody gets 1 vote. So if you want to look through the questions right quick, see one that you really like if you haven't asked one, and vote that up, and we will spend most of our time there. So let's jump into the questions. We'll see who has the most popular one. Looks like Bill King and Ricardo have the 2 most popular questions. So as we go through these, Ashleigh, we'll do it ladies first. So I'm going to ask you to answer the question. I'll read it out, and then we'll get your comments on it also. Bill asks, of the characteristics of a great Pilsner is the hop finish. It's forward, but not too assaultive. What kind of hop schedule do you use to get this finish?
Oh, sorry. I see you.
I got it. Go ahead.
Thank you. I mentioned it before, but we use first wort hopping, a very hefty amount. Basically ends up being 50% of our entire hop material. We calculate first wort hops. And it's a lab number. Nobody believes it, but it's true. It actually contributes the same bitterness as a 20-minute towards the end of boil hop addition. So it basically 1/3 of our IBUs come from first wort hopping, and 2/3 of our IBUs come from a 70-minute hop addition, and that's it. There's something really cool what happens in first wort hoppings. There's a protective thing about the pH of the wort at that time. But again, as a lab number, it really is calculated IBU wise as a 20-minute hop addition. And that's why we use such a hefty amount of first wort hops, and I think contributes greatly to the hop aroma in this beer and the finish.
Will?
Well, we've been discussing hops so much. It seems like we've been remiss about the malt. Really good lager beer has a malt character, if not emphasis. So yeah, while we're talking Pilsner, and of course that's more of an emphasis for that, but let's not forget that malt. And I think that's why we really love Helles, for example, and certain beers because of that malt character. And also I want to say, be aware, beer's thousands of years old, 5, 6, 7,000. Hops have only been introduced 1,000 years ago. So the hops are introduced in order to have a more balanced flavor within the beverage. But as far as now, it's obviously integral. At Chuckanut, we use basically consideration for isomerization and at about 30, allowing the hops to end to boil about 30 minutes. We do add finishing hops at the end, depending upon what the intent is of that particular beer. Now, the other thing is we had some very original hops, but more like a boiling stone effect, so we don't get any isomerization from that. But we use a mix. Ashleigh is Mittelfru. I thought Mittelfru was the most wonderful hop in the world about 20 years ago, and we were totally dependent upon it until we couldn't get any Mittelfru in because there was an issue with too much herbicide that they put on it. So one year we were stuck without our hops. So I'll never be stuck like that again. So we use more of a variety, a mixture of our hops. For our Pilsner, it's Saaz, but mainly it's German hops and mixtures of that.
All right, we will move on to our next question. That was a great one, Bill. Another of our top questions comes from Ricardo. Now, Ricardo asks, and Bill, if you don't mind answering this one first. If you were to pick a commercial lager yeast that isn't your yeast or your house yeast, what yeast would you pick and why? Is your choice based on attenuation or flocculation, sulfur, esters, fusels, diacetyl reduction? So what would you prioritize if you're not using your favorite house yeast?
Well, we use 3470, and I've been using that for probably 20 years because it's a workhorse. I mean, it does the thing. So asking me what other beer yeast I would use, Augustina or something, because there's a history there. I'm not familiar with using those, but whatever yeast I use, because our processing is the most important thing. Our processing, how we understand each step in the brewing process, from the brew house to finishing beer. So I think our processing would cover most of the considerations.
Ashleigh, how about you?
Yeah, I'm a 3470 as well. I don't know that I'd use another yeast. I've used on decks before. I've not had as good as luck with some Augustiner as some other brewers have, and it has a lot of history, but I'm not sure what we have as Augustiner is Augustiner yeast. So there's that to be said. To me, the priorities are attenuation. I like how cold that 3470 ferments at. It's part of what builds sulfur, so some of them don't build that really nice struck match sulfur as well. And then, I guess as far as diacetyl reduction goes, it's really not a concern unless you're talking about necessarily a Czech yeast, which are kind of they quit a little bit earlier and they leave a little bit more satiating flavors behind. But if you're fermenting cold enough, you create less of the precursors for diacetyl to begin with. So honestly, any of those lager yeasts shouldn't have very much diacetyl associated with it. But to me, it's dryness and sulfur if I had to pick. But 3470 is that's the go-to. So I don't know that I would pick another one. I already did that once.
Yeah,
Well, we're great.
And there's a saying: if it works, don't fix it. Yeah.
And just as we transition to the next question, I thought I had the lineup of all the beers, so I thought I would show that. So let's just kind of, again, these are in order of the pour. So this is the Coors Banquet, and they've warmed up a little bit so you can see the clarity a little bit better. This is the Bohemia. This is the Bitburger. And this is Ashleigh's Bierstadt Pils. So you can see it's a little bit lighter color. It looks dark because there's a can behind it, so I'll move that. But the certainly a little bit lighter in color, as Ashleigh pointed out. But the lacing on your Bierstadt is looks like the best, Ashleigh.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Causes me a lot of consternation on that canning line. So,
Well, and it's certainly being so fresh makes all the rest of them taste like day old bread.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question. Our next question comes from Paul. Well, let's see. Actually, Ricardo has actually the most popular next question. If money wasn't a problem or priority, what improvements would you make to your brewery and or processes? Will you take that one first?
Well, we're pretty set engineering wise as far as how we do. I work with our fabricators over various ones over the years, and so I'm able to put in brewers' perspective. Too often, brewers are being told how they should make beer with the equipment. No, I work with the manufacturers, but I'm a brewer and an engineer as well, and I can't have other people, non-brewers, tell me how I should brew beer. So I feel very comfortable with our system. What we're working on is actually getting more beer out, canned in particular, and so expanding the availability to people.
Well, now, Ashleigh, I know equipment-wise, and Will, I know you kind of walked me through that, but you actually have some pretty unique kettles and maybe other equipment. What if money wasn't an object? What would be your next acquisition?
I mean, besides, tell Mara I said hi. I don't know. Besides like a gold walkway and like a in-house masseuse and somebody to do my laundry. Honestly, I have pretty much everything I want. It's important to me. We spent a lot on the hard costs of this brewery. I really wanted to do everything myself. I'm 37. I am not at the point in my career where I want to stop making beer or I want somebody else to do it for me. So honestly, from the beginning, it was very important that we put the things in place so that I could be the person making the beer. And I make pretty much, I mean, my husband comes in on brew days and he, helps make our triple batches, which last all night and we brew overnight. But other than that, and I have a part-time assistant that cleans kegs and helps on the canning line and has taken over a couple, end of brew responsibilities. I make every single drop, transfer every single beer, filter every single beer, package every single beer. So honestly, I would like a life assistant if I could. So, a robot to sweep up my house for my dogs, a little bit stuff like that. But as far as the brewery concerned, I have everything that I want. We bought a brew house from 1932 from Germany, brought it over to the United States, makes about 35 barrels or so at a time, 90 barrel fermenters from Germany as well. And then custom built lager tanks from a company called Sprinkman in Wisconsin. So, I wanted all the things. I have a sloping floor. hard pipes. I don't have to lug hoses. We put it together at the beginning at great cost and at great cost to ourselves, so that because what you have when you open a brewery, nobody will tell you this, is what you end up with, or that's what you're going to have for a long time. There's always a better place to spend money. So yeah, if I could get like an assistant for my life, that'd be great. If I had all the money in the world, that's what would happen. I'd have a live-in house assistant. So
Will, I want to give you kind of the final answer on this because I know when we talked, I mentioned to you about an ale brewer wanting to brew lagers, and you kind of grimaced at that. So, what do they need equipment-wise?
Well, once again, let's look at what a lager is as far as low temperature considerations, both in lagering to make lager beer. And also, I think to look at each step along the way, from obviously the raw materials, but let's start manufacturing, brew house activities. Look at mashing. Look at how your lautering is done. And the intent here is clarity. Once again, we make a liquid of beer. We don't make a sludge. And so what happens here is think in terms of residual solids throughout the process and how are those addressed, and minimize that going through the process from the brew house, mashing, lautering, kettle, etc., to fermentation. And the other thing I want to point out later on here is that the solids associated with yeast. A test I have my brewers do is, for example, when we get the yeast out, taste that yeast. Is that a flavor you want in your beer? It's obviously important in manufacturing, but that's the residual you want to address to remove it significantly enough. So it's looking at every step along the way, optimizing each step along the way. How many steps are there? Certainly more than 1, 2, 50, 100, and they're all interdependent. So work through the entire process and look at each stage of the manufacturing process to optimize beer quality.
Okay, now I'm going to show my ignorance. I have tasted a lot of things in my brewing, but I have never taken a big old swig of old or spent yeast. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm suggesting here. And think in terms of, okay, these are solids. Okay, once we find that we have, if this is a fine tasting attribute, then it really opens up possibility of throwing dead mice and dead cats into it to create products that we might enjoy. But the point is, probably not. And taste that. And think in terms of anything within your solution. Think it's almost obvious. It's not, we can get down to science as far as chemistry and such, but it's more practical, more common sense. If you have material in your solution, the longer that stays in the solution, if it's not a desirable, if it's not an important thing, it's going to ultimately impact your flavor of that product.
Well, I will have to try my yeast next time. But right. I think it brings up one more good question. And Ashley, I'd like to maybe you can give me a short version. I'm sure you've thought about this several times, but brewers think a lot about equipment. You went to an extra special effort to get a very unique piece of equipment for your brewery. Can you talk about that a little bit? The decision to get it and then the results now that you have it?
The brewery itself, or are we specifically talking about like a flotation tank? Or, we got a lot of very special equipment.
I was thinking you got some original equipment, copper kettles and all that. For someone that's considering either upgrading their brewery or starting a brewery, the importance of that kind of equipment.
I don't know if it's important or not. To me it is, because honestly, it's just really cool. Like, I'm not going to undo the cool factor from it. That's a piece of history that survived, World War II. Like, it's kind of amazing to me. Copper has some effects on sulfur reduction and things like that. But it was purpose built to do the thing that I already wanted to do. Will's an engineer. He understands. He built the brew house in the way he wanted to do it. This thing was already purpose built to make the kind of beer I already wanted to make. So, it made a lot of sense to get something old because also it's cool. It's copper. It's very striking. It's got a lot of history. But also it is made to do 4.5 to 1 liquor to grist ratio. It's made to do decoction very easily. It's designed in a way to boil a certain way. Like, it was made to do what I'm doing with it. And so if you're not trying to do what I'm doing with it, actually today I made like some 16 Plato wort for a sour brewery that we make wort for 4 times a year. And we made a beer that it is not used to and it does not like it. So it's a very purpose-built piece of equipment.
All right, great answers. And Paul, what a great question. So we're going to move on to the next couple of questions. Paul has the next one. What are your recommendations for yeast pitching, oxygen, and cold crashing rates? And Ashleigh, why don't you take that one first?
1.5 million cells per mil per degree Plato. For everything under 16 Plato, 2 million cells per mil per degree Plato. For everything 16 Plato and up. Let's see, oxygen. You have to be a little careful about oxygen with lager brewing because you are knocking out so cold you can over-oxygenate. We use compressed sterile air through a Venturi tube. We knock out at 3 degrees Celsius, so very, very cold. And what was the last one? What was the last
cold
question?
Crashing rates.
Never crash your lager. That's my opinion. I have a very strong opinion. You should take it down slowly and never do a diacetyl rest either. I'm very against a diacetyl rest. It's not that it makes for bad beer, and I understand production deadlines and things like that. But the point of lager, and yes, it is getting it cold, is lager yeast is amazing in that it will continue to ferment as long as it's still in solution. Just like cal ale yeast, it can ferment trisaccharides. Don't let the lager yeast do the work for you. Don't force it to work a different way. So if you pitch enough healthy yeast, all these things are possible. So it takes me about 4 weeks to get down to 0 degrees C, where my fermenter is set. And after that, I end up back basically at -1 C. So it takes me a long time to get there and then let it sit for as long as I can let it be there.
So Will, pitching rates, oxygen, and cold crashing.
Okay, let me do, I'm an old guy, so you might have to run those by me again. As far as the pitching rate consideration, the numbers are fine, but I want to point out here, it also assuming you have quality yeast to begin with. Think of the yeast as your team. So we're playing this game. We're game of football. We could run out on the street and we get 11 folks off the street, grandmothers, little kids and all. No, that's not the best football team, but they comply with the numbers. So it's important to make sure the yeast is of optimum condition as far as that goes, to adhere to those numbers. As far as so use those numbers, and we have some play, but to use those numbers, that's a big assumption. If you're maybe you can adjust. If you're less vigorous, then you have to adjust as well. Okay, then as far as coming down in temperature, for at least for us at Chuckanut, what we do for the sake of respecting the yeast as such a prime worker. So for us, we don't crash a tank either. Fortunately, we use computerization within what we do, so we actually have a controlled routine where we lower the temperature down a degree Fahrenheit per hour under controlled conditions. We'll go down to 35 degrees Fahrenheit, then we harvest these. Yeast is settled out, and we middle crop. That's an important consideration in this, because what happens is the various generations will change their own times too. So conceptually, you middle crop, to get the optimum yeast. Like I said, like a football player. These are our prime players that we want to get, not just a number. So respect the yeast as far as doing its thing. And what other questions that were there?
Oxygen.
So what happens here is we essentially for our processing, we oxygenate enough to a point of saturation. So these are equilibrium conditions, temperature, concentration types of things. So we will get that, and actually we'll go a bit more then saturation. But the point is, we want to invigorate that yeast with oxygen, and so we put it in actually a bit numerically as far as the content. We will add more yeast to the tune of about 2-to-1 to saturation rates. And yeah, it's going, once again, it's a fermenter. It's going to come out solution because, it can't stay in over a saturation condition. So we invigorate the yeast with sterile oxygen as well. We used to use air, sterile air, but we find oxygen is a bit nicer for usage.
All right. That was a great question and great answers. So we are at the top of the hour, which means, and we've got 30 questions. So if we're going to get through them all, which I would love to do, we're going to have to do about 1 minute apiece. And I'm going to ask just one of you to answer the question so we can get through them all. So maybe what I would suggest, if one of you wants to take the question as I'm reading it off, holler at me or whatever, and we'll move to you first. So again, we'll try and get through these. We'll keep it about a minute apiece, kind of rapid fire. So Ricardo asks, is taking the beer off yeast after flocculation still a problem in low hydrostatic pressure settings like home brewing or shallow open fermenters?
I mean, if you want to answer, Will, you can. I have kind of an answer, I guess.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Okay, well, we so the way that our fermenters are shaped are actually very different. We don't have cylinder conicals. So our actual fermenters themselves, which it spends about 11 to 14 days in, actually have a standpipe. So when Will was talking before about harvesting the middle section, ours is a little bit different, as that we take the beer actually off the yeast cake. We don't actually harvest from a cone. And in that, we are taking the hydrostatic pressure off the yeast. We never have pressure on our yeast. So actually all the beer leaves to a lager tank and then harvest all the yeast off there, because the hydrostatic pressure is a problem. And yeast don't really like that pressure. And so then we harvest what's left behind. We actually pull a standpipe and then harvest the rest of the material. So I do believe in that idea. I don't know that for a home brewer, the hydrostatic pressure is necessarily a problem. But, you need to think about necessarily how cold it is. It is good to get it off the yeast. Absolutely. Because, that's some unsavory stuff when it sits there for too long. But it's not necessarily as important as a professional brewer, as long as you're not wrestling it or, jostling it up too much. And as long as you're keeping it cold. We reuse the yeast quite a bit. I would assume most home brewers do not. But I think it's always a good way to take it off the yeast, because yeast do love a change of scenery. It will help brighten your beer faster as well.
All right, we're going to move to the next question. CT has the next one. And again, whoever wants this one, just jump on it. How important is the Sauergut in the flavor profile of Bavarian lagers? Do you use Sauergut in your beer? And did I pronounce it right?
I'm not familiar. Yeah.
Like sourwort?
Yeah.
Oh, sourwort? No. Yeah.
Who wants to run with the question?
No, you're talking acidification there. So that's, yeah. No, what we do is we do adjustments. We do water adjustments. And as far as the malt addition and mashing, we get, we strive to get a pH around 5.4, for example. And we're able to attain that. So as far as acidification, we work with soft water, and it's important to add enough for the calcium, but with the mashing routine, we get a satisfactory acidification.
So did I pronounce it right?
Beats me.
Sourwort, yeah.
Close enough. Okay. Next question comes from Johan. When brewing low ABV lagers, below 4.5%, do you advise adjusting the mashing process and or adding specialty malts to avoid a watery body or a lack of flavor? I don't want to sacrifice drinkability. Who can answer that one?
I'll answer this one. I have strong opinions. Um, just because a beer is small doesn't make it thin. In fact, it's one of my least favorite beer terminology. Generally speaking, I find that beers that people find thin are not due to the alcohol content. They're due to actually bad pH. They're flabby. They're not snappy. They miss that lip geschmack that real lager beer needs, that snappiness. So I don't think you need to worry about that. You should always worry about, and drinkability is dryness, how much residual sugar is left in the beer. Dry beers are not thin. I think you can say that when you drink all of these beers that you just had are all extremely dry beers. If you're looking to increase some of the mouthfeel, things like that, there's carbonic acid. But I think in a beer that's low alcohol, it's choosing your ingredients carefully, not overusing any of them, and making sure your pHs are proper. And that will avoid a lot of your problems.
All right, our next question. Ricardo asks, should a pale lager have a touch of sulfur in the aroma and flavor?
I guess if you like it, we make beers that really don't have sulfur aspect to it. And I think for whatever reason, using 3470 and accomplishing pretty good attenuation, what Ashleigh pointed out there, the finishing, the dryness, that's important in the intent, and that's associated with proper attenuation. A lot of issues go back to yeast quality there, and you don't get that attenuation. So as far as yeast performance, then it's a matter of some yeast do and some don't, and pick what you want to do. With 3470, we don't have a problem with sulfur.
Let's move to the next question. Steve asks, what steps do you take to mitigate oxygen on the hot side? How important is hot side aeration in preserving fresh grain flavors?
I don't.
Yeah, no, we don't.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, to me, some of the studies, and I'm sure, you have to pick and choose where you focus what you want to do. Oftentimes, too much is done for the sake of trying to address something, and it create problems as opposed to solving a solution. The other aspect, what you want, and I know there's been a lot of literature about hot side aeration sets. Look at temperatures we're talking about. We're talking about high temperatures. Why is the solubility of oxygen in high temperatures? It's not there. So this is another important consideration as far as concentration of oxygen with that. Yes, with low temperature and as after fermentation, you don't introduce any oxygen. If you do, you're going to start destroying that product. So you have to make sure you have closed systems after it's done its thing with fermentation and the oxygen usage. But prior to then, you look at, I would submit you look at conditions here. What are you going to do? How are you going to affect that? And what are you affecting? Once again, you have high temperature considerations, and we tend to make some of the best beers. Both Ashleigh and ourselves tend to make some of the best beers around that you can get. So go with that.
Ashleigh, I've got to ask, because I know this is a contentious subject. So do you have a comment on hot side aeration?
I see in the chat here, it's the Germans completely disagree. And the reason they completely disagree is because it is about longevity of flavor, right? I mean, Will just said it, that when you're that warm, hot side aeration, I mean, how much oxygen can you get in there? There's actually other studies that point to that it may be better to oxidize on the hot side because it leaves less available on the cold side. So there's that. Also, some of the Germans, the reason that they believe that is because they're trying to focus on shelf life. And I can tell you, I just had this Bitburger that's 6 months old and it's hot garbage. So, get the cold side right, get all the other things right, and then maybe we can have a discussion about whether or not hot side aeration is a thing. And honestly, I appreciate home brewers and what they're trying to do, bringing some of these things back. And I have a real appreciation for, bringing some of these things up that maybe we aren't as familiar with. But I can tell you, I never want to get to the point in my career where I have to start worrying about hot cideration, because I want the beer to be drank fast enough that that's not going to matter if it is a thing. So thanks for taking that, Will. I was getting all fired up over here.
Let me also add something else here. The interesting thing is how beer is done in Germany and forced to be done in Germany versus the United States, as far as brew house actions and control of not just emissions, but a closed system there as far as brew house action. We have the luxury of, we don't have that. We don't have that. We can boil off. We don't have to have that closed system that really forces that pressurized, closed aspect that they have to abide by in Germany. So we have a luxury. Let's take advantage of our luxury.
All right. I had to dive into that one just a little bit, but we do have 24 other questions and less than 20 minutes. So we'll dive into that. Steve, great question. We're going to move to Gary's question next. What's your opinion on using acidulated malt to achieve the proper mash pH? Who's going to take that one?
I mean, I think you kind of talked about it a little bit. I do use sourwort to adjust pH. I use actual sourwort. We were the first brewery in the United States to actually bring in a shelf-stable version of it. So it is Reinheitsgebot. It's actually made from wort. It's like a 60 Plato, super low pH. 10 kilos of it will bring 35 hectos down 0.2, basically. So I do use a pH adjustment for our mash and at the beginning of boil, not the end of boil, to make sure our knockout pH is in the 5.1 range. So I was using acidulated malt. I prefer the sourwort, as it turns out.
You prefer the sourwort over acidulated malt?
Yeah, for me, it's so acidulated malt is just basically malt sprayed with lactic acid. There are other things in sourwort, phosphates and things like that that have there's some papers and stuff. And for me, it's just easier to not have one more thing. I basically am a 3 malt, 2 hop, 1 yeast brewery. So if I don't have to keep bags of malt on hand for that, I mean, you could just as well lower the pH with lactic acid if you wanted to. But that's not necessarily, we're not a Reinheitsgebot brewery, but I prefer to use the ingredients that are made from malt, etc. So
we use acidulated malt, and that's one of the things that assists us in how we do it.
So you like it?
Yes, yeah. It's yeah.
Simple enough. Johan has the next question. As a topic suggestion, please ask Ashleigh and Will to talk about any special consideration for Rauch beer recipe development. Okay, so we're pretty short on time, but does one of you have a quick comment on
the
Rauch
more
beer?
smoke malt, the better. Don't dilly dally. I mean, that's me. Don't dilly dally. It's like, imagine being at a campfire. When you're surrounded by the campfire, you stop smelling it. When there's a campfire in the distance, it seems very strongly campfirey. 75% plus. That's me. I don't know how you feel, Will, but
well, this is most definitely a research question, which means you have to go to Bamberg.
I've been. Oh,
road trip. Well, I will have to say, I had a Grodzicki, which actually won in Brazil, which is a smoked beer, and it was quite pronounced. Nathan has the next question. If decoction isn't an option for a brewery, what are some of the recommendations for still making a world-class lager?
Did you say decoction within that?
Yeah, if you don't have the ability to make decoction, but you still want to make a world-class lager.
We make a world-class lager without decoction. Let me put it that way. And a lot of breweries do that as well. And it's really looking at what is the intent, ultimately getting to fermentation, right? So let's split it from brew house to fermentation. And now we're talking brew house and what is the work coming out. And so the idea here, at least for us, is to try to optimize your mashing, your lautering, your kettle, your whirlpool to get the optimum work going to fermentation. Is decoction necessary? Well, there are some chemical considerations that I think should come into play. Some of the best beers in the world are made with decoction. Some of the best beers in the world are made without decoction. Just like Ashleigh does certain things different than we do, because that's how she does it and that's how we do it. There are a number of ways to make the best beer in the world. Ashleigh, she makes some of the best beer in the world like we do.
Well, Ashley, I have to ask, decoction or not?
I'm a decoction. I really like making beer, and that to me is part of it. I really like the aromas. It makes, I would not say decoction is better or worse. I would say it does change the flavor, and you have to decide if that's the flavor you want or you don't want. Also, we're a steam-fired system as compared to maybe a direct fire system. You know, there's things to consider, such as aldehydes and you know, caramelization, etc. So I think you can. I think to me, it's just one of the pieces that makes our beer taste like our beer and the way I like it. So I totally agree. I think you should do what you want to do. But I don't think it's unnecessary. I don't think it's necessary either. I just think you have to decide what your purpose is in doing it or not doing it.
Well, I hadn't had Will's beer, but I know how good yours is.
I know how good his beer is, to tell you. So it's way excellent. And they also make some mean tacos at their house. I've sat on that deck back there.
All right, Jeff has the next question. And by the way, we're about 13 minutes left, and it looks like we have 20 questions, so we have to really go quick. Jeff asks, I've seen an apparent attenuation rate starting in Kuhn's and other German techs as often being 80% plus, especially for German Pilsners. I've struggled to get my lagers to attenuate beyond the mid-70s, 78% being about the most I've ever achieved. What are your recommendations for achieving this level of attenuation?
I mean, I think, you know, yeast, I mean, that's the biggest thing. Having healthy yeast and pitching enough of the healthy yeast is one of the biggest considerations, especially as a home brewer. Secondly, looking at your recipe formulation, if you have crystal and caramel and malts in there, it's going to be less fermentable. And then looking at if you have the ability to do a step mash in your mashing schedule. I mean, those would be the three things off the top of my head. I don't know if Will can think of, you know,
Well,
that's basically it.
yeah, I don't know. And you know, to target that, this is actually a very interesting chemistry question unto itself, not necessarily a brewing question for better beer. So I would submit that because you look at targets and sometimes presented targets are extreme, and so I can see that beer. Whoa, that's going to be an incredibly dry beer. Of course it is. Does that have the drinkability? What have you done in order to attain extreme attenuation at the expense of other flavoring aspects? That's what I would be cautious about.
All right. Again, we're probably about 12 minutes and 21 questions. So we're going to have to move this. Franco asks the next most popular question. Any suggestion for ranges for water profile in Pilsners? Ooh, big question. Who wants to take that one?
Well, you have very soft water, which a lot of them are. You have hard water, Dortmunder style. So you can go from soft to medium hard as far as the hardness content. Yeah. But once again, a suggestion here is taste that water too and think of it in terms of what your final beer will be. Is that contributory to it, or does it really offset some of the aspects of what you're intended, the beauty and the mildness and the wonderful smoothness of malt?
Yeah, I'm getting a theme here. I mean, you're tasting your yeast, the spent yeast, the water, everything. Sounds like sensory is really, really important to your brewery.
Well, what I'm trying to really focus in on is trying to present a scenario where there are positive and negative flavors with beer. And the positive flavors are inherent and innate with virtually any beer. What makes a beer not good is that too much negative flavors. So the focus should be on what can you do to bring out those smooth, wonderful, drinkable qualities, introducing things that detract from that, positive and negative flavors. Too often flavor is just too simplistic, assuming it's positive. No, that's absurd. There's all sorts of negative flavors that we have to focus on.
All right, our next question comes from Steve. Steve asks, what's your typical mash schedule, time and temperature for a pale lager?
55 for 10, 62 for 30 to 40, 72, 30 to 40, mash out. And I usually do a decoction at the end, if not a double decoction from 62 to 71.
Short answer, I like that. Peter asks the next one. The best lager I've had retained the flavor of malt so well that it tastes like I'm eating a handful of malt while I'm drinking the beer. How does one master this magic?
It's called making a good Helles. That's what comes through you're addressing. And once again, I submit that the wonderful positive flavors can be too subtle. So try to figure out if it's not smooth, and by the way, smooth, that's ultimately talks in terms of drinkability. If it's not smooth, it's for some problem in the beer making versus the beer what should be.
I love that question, Peter. Good one. Nathan asks, decoctions, your thoughts and opinion on the importance in lager production.
I think we did that one already, decoctions.
I think.
Well, I was asking a little different way. Somebody want to answer it real quick?
I mean, you can or you can't. It's up to you.
Yeah.
All right. That's moving on with short answers. Thank you.
We talked about it. I was trying to help.
You wanted short. It actually gave you.
That's right. So Nathan asks, do you recommend maintaining a high level of hydrostatic pressure in a lager fermentation for cleaner beer?
No, what happened is pressure is a negative aspect. All of our beers, we use spooning devices. So the carbonation is natural fermentation through this, created during the spooning process here. It's at the end. It does put on pressure. So we have to weigh that. Yes, that's a negative aspect. However, adding CO2 is that even more negative. And we have yeast that is healthy enough, that's vigorous enough, solid enough that it can withstand that imposition, if you will. So yeah, think in terms of pressure is not positive for your yeast, but sometimes you have to weigh one versus the other.
All right, we are down to about a little over 7 minutes, and we have 15 questions, so we'll just have a few here. Mr. Kemper, Greg asks, would you brew a world-class Kolsch beer, and would you finish that with lager yeast?
They do finish it. They do brew world-class Kolsch beer already.
Well, we've been fortunate that our Kolsch has won gold medal at GABF a number of times as well as World Beer Cup and such. So we do okay with Kolsch. But the reason we do well with Kolsch is when I was in Istanbul, when my assistant brewers was from Cologne, he brought a yeast strain that we have used since. So it's specific for Kolsch from Cologne. It has a slightly it's about the most lager-like ale fermentation of a yeast, ale yeast I've ever come across. So that's why I use it for Kolsch. We don't have to do lager with that, and but it's a very specific yeast. It's a proprietary yeast, by the way. So
good answer. All right. Next question comes from Tyler. Tips on achieving dry mouthfeel, body, and crispness.
Attenuation, high attenuation, carbonic acid.
Yeah.
Those are the two biggest things.
Yeah, no.
All right. We're going to move through these. Gary has the next one. Water. Do you prefer RO water with mineral profile added, or just adjusting existing water?
Well, we're fortunate at Chuckanut, and the water supply we use is incredibly soft anyway, so we don't have to adjust that. However, if you're working with something where your input water is so extreme in the chemistry of it, then you got to figure out how the heck you're going to adjust it.
All right, our next question comes from Philip. Can you comment on Bierstadt and Chuckanut water profiles and what you do as far as adjusting it with minerals? Kind of the same question, but maybe Ashleigh, you'll answer it, give a little different twist on it.
I don't adjust much. Recently in Colorado, a year ago now, I guess, they decided that we had too much iron in some of our pipes, so they actually radically changed our water here and dumped sodium hydroxide into the water. So I have to adjust my pH down. So I pneumatically feed in lactic acid to my water, and then we just chlorine and chloramine filter. Denver water's pretty good besides the pH, and use a little calcium chloride in pills. But other than that, no adjustments.
All right, and I was just putting in the chat there the Zoom link for anybody that would like to join us for when this is over, which is going to be in about 3 minutes. So we have 12 questions in 3 minutes. Again, I'll take the most popular, and it looks like Josh has the next one. Will, can you tell the ham in the boil kettle story that you told at CBC?
Maybe not.
Keep it short.
Okay. So what happens is that there was a brewery at one time and had head retention issues, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. But this, it won't retain any head at all. Well, looking back there, they found out that what happened was that there was one kettleman that was operating when this seemed to happen. They looked a bit further and found out that what this fellow was doing, he's putting a ham at the end of a rope and throwing it in the kettle while he's making, during boil. I'm sure the ham was wonderful, but it rather impacted head retention.
Are you for real?
Yeah, that's the MBAA article I read. I thought
Oh my God.
Okay, I have one more MBAA article. Goes back into the 1800s. And what happened was that in the 1800s, the MBAA had meetings there, and they seemed to be closed, and so the public had with it. And so they said, okay, we should open it up. And they did. Unfortunately, the public didn't find out much about what went on because the meeting was held in German.
Well, and I like Phil's comment. Now that's how do you really make a Rauch beer with the ham story.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, we have just about 90 seconds left, so I think we're going to have to wrap up on your story there, Will. And I think I learned something there. We need to get you going on your stories next time because they're quite colorful. What a fun time I have had. I want to show this beautiful array of beers that you guys suggested. Ashleigh, this is yours on the end, and this is the Coors that we started with. What a beautiful array of beers. What a fun program. Thank you for taking so much time. For those of you that hadn't had enough, we've got a Zoom call after this, and this is going to very unceremoniously end in just about 30 seconds. But again, I wanted to thank everybody in the audience. Thank you. We had a ton of people. What does he, 1,700 registered? Let me swing that open there where I can see it. 1,768. Wow. What a nice crowd. You guys know how to get a great crowd, but they asked for you. We got 10 seconds left. Will, thank you so much. Ashleigh, thank you so much. This was
Thank you